Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. I'm Noah Mintz, the store's event coordinator. Community Bookstore will be celebrating 50 years in business this fall, and we credit the continued support of readers and writers for this milestone. Thank you for spending the evening with us. Tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome Benjamin Labatut for a discussion of his new National Book Award shortlisted novel, When We Cease to Understand the World, in conversation with Lawrence Weschler. This evening's event is presented as part of our ongoing series with New York Review Books and in partnership with Arts, Letters, and Numbers as part of its series of Weschler-curated conversations in the Italian virtual pavilion of the current 17th Venice Architecture Biennale. Now to some housekeeping. We've enabled Zoom's auto-transcribe setting, so if your version of Zoom is up to date, hit the live transcription button on the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. If you have any questions for tonight's guests, please click on the Q&A button also on the bottom of your screen to submit them. We'll be asking those towards the end of the program, so please don't be shy. There's also a chat box through which I will be posting a link to buy tonight's book, if you haven't already. One caveat for tonight is that we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections, so please bear with any technical issues that might arise, and we'll try to resolve them quickly. And we've scheduled a whole host of fall programming for you, so head over to our website, communitybookstore.net, sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out in particular is next Thursday, October 28th. We're joined by Hernan Diaz, Roxana Robinson, and Ed Simon for a panel discussion on Edith Wharton's Ghost Stories, newly reissued from NYR Classics. That program's up on our website now and taking registrations. Now a little about tonight's guests, and we'll get started. Benjamin Labatut was born in Rotterdam in 1980 and grew up in The Hague, Buenos Aires, and Lima. He published 2 award-winning works of fiction prior to When We Cease to Understand the World, which is his first book to be translated into English. Labatut lives with his family in Santiago, Chile. Lawrence Weschler, a veteran of 20 years at The New Yorker, where his work shuttled between political tragedies and cultural comedies, and then 14 years directing the New York Institute for the Humanities at NYU, is the author of over 20 books, including Seeing is Forgetting the Name of the Thing One Sees, his celebrated biography of artist Robert Irwin, Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonder on LA's Museum of Jurassic Technology, and How Are You, Dr. Sachs, a biographical memoir of his 35-year friendship with the neurologist Oliver Sacks. And coming soon, a trove of Zohars. So now, without any further ado, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you both so much for joining us here tonight.
Thank you, Noah. Benjamin, it's so good. We've been talking for the last COVID months, and I was hoping to come down to Chile to visit with you, but Chile was closed down during much of this time, so I wasn't able to. But I thought I'd begin with a quick little story. I first read about your book in an article in The Guardian around the time it came out in London with Pushkin Press. And around the same time, the Paris bookstore of Shakespeare and Company, the English language bookstore, was in great distress because of COVID and was asking that you order books there because they were about to go bankrupt. And so I figured, well, I'll do this, and that way maybe I'll be able to get it. You couldn't buy it in those days on Amazon in the United States. And apparently there was such good response that it took them 8 months to get the book to me, by which time I'd forgotten I'd asked about it. When it arrived, I had this weird sense of deja vu. And I'll just tell a quick story. 24 years ago this year, I was minding my own business in a bookstore in New York City, and from around the bend of one of the shelves came one of my fellows from my Institute for Humanities at NYU. Actually, it was Ted Mooney, the novelist. And he had a book in his hand, and he just shoved it into my chest so hard that it almost broke my ribs, it felt like. And he just looked at me kind of stunned with this kind of hollow look in his face, and I was holding the book and he just walked away, and I figured I guess I better buy this book and figure out what this is. And I went out to the park and started reading it. I'm a slow reader. It took me the weekend, and by the end of the weekend, I was telling everybody I knew that this was like the book of the decade. It was definitely going to win the Nobel Prize, da-da-da. It was one of the most overwhelming readerly experiences I'd had, and this happened to be Saramago's Blindness, the week it came out in English. But I haven't had that kind of experience until last year, or earlier this year, when I was just blown away by this book. It's much shorter. It's in fact shockingly short, given the its explosive and reverberant power. But anyway, I was hooked, and I began corresponding with you, Benjamin, at that point. Uh, it's something, and I'm by no means the only person who's been having these sorts of reactions, and you can see if you look online all the similar kinds of reactions. Um, I thought what we do is give a very quick sense of what the book as a whole is, and then I thought maybe, Benjamin, you could just read us a passage. We'd agreed on a passage that seemed good. Um, do you want to? What do you say when people ask you what this thing is that you have wrought?
I usually say that it's a strange book about strange ideas, and that those ideas have sort of infected the form of the book. I I'm very I really dislike when people call it a novel because I don't see it as a novel in any sense really, and because I don't like reading or writing novels. I think it's a book that starts with a sort of not chemically pure essay because it has a single paragraph of fiction. And then that fiction bleeds into the following two texts. The first text is basically following, charting the history of a molecule of a poison, cyanide. And that's how it began. It was as simple as that. I had these I read that it covered Halley's Comet and that it was a precursor to amino acids. So possibly it had sort of a relationship with DNA and the beginning of life. And then I just kept following it. It was really that simple. And the second two texts, I see them as short stories. They're really short stories.
Well, you're being. Let me help people because you're being difficult, as you are wont. I will try my version, and you will tell me. The title in English is "When We Cease to Understand the World," which is not the title in Spanish. Just a little bit more blatantly what it is. But these are a series of texts who involve actual historical figures, people who were important figures. I would say that in general, it is a group of chemists and mathematicians and physicists who, during the first third of the 20th century, with the exception of a pair of mathematicians who are later, but during most of the book, involves a group of people, and they're quite famous, Haber and Schwarzschild and Schrodinger and Heisenberg and Einstein and Bohr and various others, who were stumbling their way toward quantum mechanics. Now, what's funny for us is that certainly my generation, we all grew up with Richard Feynman telling us that don't bother trying to make sense of it. It doesn't make sense. It's completely counterintuitive. It's counter-rational. It just works. But part of the genius of this book, and I use that lowercase genius, I'm not MacArthuring you or anything, is the idea is really to imagine what it must have been like to see that stuff swimming into view for the first time, and how mind-blowing that must have been, and how upending it must have been, and how shattering in various sorts of ways. And
well, I wouldn't describe the book that way, Ren, because it's quantum mechanics is just takes up one of the texts, and that text is the longest one, and it's a sort of novella. It's a sort of short, and that fiction is about the discovery that the two men who discovered two radically different opposing visions of quantum mechanics. But the other things, I see it as a sort of a series of meditations on what is abysmal, what is those parts of knowledge, of scientific knowledge, that we still haven't understood. And it begins with the sort of the abyss of war, really. It's a meditation on evil, that first text. I say meditation tongue in cheek because I don't really have any opinions there. I don't meditate on anything. I just present like some raw facts.
That
But
first
then,
chapter, which is called Prussian Blue,
yeah,
and has everything from it is a whole series of seemingly uh, these arms of almost like an octopus, or it's more like Legos almost. They just snap together with this very satisfying snap of convergence of these different kinds of facts about how Prussian blue, the color, is related to cyanide, is related to this, is related to that, and it's just this. It gradually becomes overwhelming in terms of goes all the way basically through to the Holocaust in
well,
that first
it's meant to
chapter.
go from art to the Holocaust. That's sort of the line, from alchemy to the Holocaust.
Right. In 20 pages, 20, 30 pages or something.
Yeah,
And it's
like
just
that.
very concentrated but extraordinary.
But then
And that,
Schwarzschild deals with the black hole, the discovery of the black hole. And
that's
even though it's become something that people believe that they understand, the truth about the black hole to this day is that the equations break down. It is sort of a blind spot for general relativity, at least, you know.
and
And
so
then you
there
have quantum mechanics, but it's not just about quantum mechanics. It's sort of it's about these ideas that defy comprehension.
right. So, but the point here, and this is where you're going to read a little passage to us in the Schwarzschild chapter, but basically, at this moment, Einstein has just published his paper on relativity, but it has equations that haven't been worked out, and it's in the middle of the war, and Schwarzschild, who's an extraordinary mind and so forth, is in the trenches and is basically working out the equations spectacularly.
Yeah. Well, he was he volunteered. He shouldn't have been fighting, less so in the front. No, he was more than 40 years old, and he was very patriotic. So, and he's dying. He's dying on the trenches. He has a blistering, necrotizing skin disease, and he gets these equations from Albert Einstein, who couldn't find that his equations are so hard that he thought he would die without anyone finding an exact solution. He had only proposed approximate solutions.
Right.
So the thing about Schwarzschild is he chose a specific set of coordinates and it clicks into place. You find an exact solution, but in that exact solution, which sort of Einstein was thrilled when he received it because it verified his theory. It also denies it, it negates
Well,
it.
why don't you
Because,
read that? Why don't you read that paragraph right now? Because
okay.
this will give people a sense of what it's like.
So this is basically referring to the singularity because it is the first mind that mathematically touched the singularity at the center of a black hole.
The singularity being the point where information can no longer escape. The whole thing is
Well,
warping
there's
into.
two. That's kind of technical because there's in Schwarzschild solution there's two. There's one at the middle of the black hole, and then there's the event horizon, which is another singularity. Both are mathematical singularities, but we shouldn't get. But let's
Yeah,
just
but just read the passage. It'll become clear.
okay.
Go ahead, read it.
And yet he could not get it out of his head. Even immersed in the chaos of war, the singularity spread across his mind like a stain, superimposed over the hellscape of the trenches. He saw it in the eyes of the dead horses buried in the muck, in the bullet wounds of his fellow soldiers, in the shadowy lenses of their hideous gas masks. His imagination had fallen prey to the pull of his discovery. With alarm, he realized that if his singularity were ever to exist, it would endure until the end of the universe. Its ideal conditions made it an eternal object that would neither grow nor diminish, but remain eternally as it was. Unlike all other things, it was immune to becoming and doubly inescapable. In the spatial geometry it generated, the singularity was located at both ends of time. One could flee from it into the remotest past or escape to the furthest future, only to encounter it once more. In the last letter he sent to his wife from Russia, written the same day he chose to share his discovery with Einstein, Schwarzschild complains of something strange that has begun to grow inside him. I don't know how to name it or define it, but it has an irrepressible force and darkens all my thoughts. It is a void without form or dimension, a shadow I can't see, but one that I can feel with the entirety of my soul. Soon afterwards, that shadow invaded his body. His sickness began with 2 blisters at the corner of his mouth. Within a month, they covered his hands, feet, throat, lips, neck, and genitals. After 2, he was dead.
And in terms of the chapter, it begins with Einstein getting this amazing letter shortly after he's published his essay, as you say, where he wasn't expecting to get these formulas for the rest of his life, as far as he was expecting, and suddenly there it is already laid out. He sends a letter back, and the letter is not received because Schwarzschild is already dead.
Well, yeah, he never. But that's the thing, no. And I want to make this point immediately clear. This is a fictional construct. The book is fictional. Is a fictional construct. I'm using the registers of nonfiction, and I'm using a hell of a lot of actual investigation to get the science right. But I do twist it to because I'm trying to reach, I think, those deeper truths that only literature can touch, and that science really has not much to say about them. But you find, for example, in the paragraph I just read, it seems that I'm being very literary when I'm saying that the singularity lies at both ends of time. But that's not true. In the mathematical discovery that Schwarzschild, he chooses as an idealized star that really doesn't exist because it doesn't rotate. It has a several set of conditions that make it an ideal object. But in that solution, you actually get this effect where the end of time and the beginning of time loop against each other. So there's this wonderful poetry in these papers and in this book about that Kip Thorne wrote, where I found this. You know? They're using the same metrics that Schwarzschild discovered right before he died.
And so a few things I want to just mention, by the way. We should mention that this translation, it's credited to Adrian Nathan West, and from what I understand, you work closely with the translation as well. I find it quite beautiful, and the book, as it is now, one of the things I'm quite struck with is how often Spanish gets beautiful translations into English. I'm thinking of Rabassa with 100 Years of Solitude, or the translation indeed of Saramago, or Alistair Reed's translations of Borges. It's something, I wonder what it is, but you do have
I think English is just a better language. That's for me. It's very clear. People hate it when I say it, but I think because I do my own translations. I'm writing my new book that just came out in Italy and in Spain. I wrote it in English. I wrote the last chapter of this book, The Night Gardener, originally in English. And I hate having to go back to Spanish because it's a headache. The sounds all bump into each other. It's terrible.
Well, okay, why don't we stop for a second? Who the hell are you?
Well, I'm Benjamin Labatut.
You are this guy in Santiago who is more comfortable or more ecstatic in English, but tell us a little bit about your background. Give us the 4 or 5 minute version.
I'll give you, I mean, I don't like to talk about myself, and you know this. So
I know, and that's why I get to do it, to nail you on it now.
Nail me on a question then. I don't have a 5 minute.
Why are you so fluent in English?
Oh, okay. Oh, well, the thing is, I was born in Holland, in the Netherlands, and then I moved back to Chile, and then I moved back, and I went to a British school for about 8 years. So I basically stopped.
A British school where?
In the Netherlands, in The Hague. And so just my brain sort of replaced one language with the other, and it stayed like that till now, till today. Most of my friends here in Chile are either foreign or bilingual. I speak to my daughter in English. She's pretty fluent by now. And I could never get my brain to consider Spanish as it used to. That's the way. And the thing is, of course, I had never been translated, so it made absolutely no sense to write in English. Mm-hmm. But my agent, who I credit as the person who helps me get my manuscripts in order, she's wonderful, Constanza Martinez. She would suddenly read certain paragraphs in the book, for example, in When We Cease to Understand This World, and say, "Why is this writing so shitty? Why is this so bad?" And I would say, "Oh, because that's a translation. I wrote that in English." And he said, "Stop doing that. These are the worst parts of the book." And so I do that. My brain just works like that.
Why did you move back to Chile?
just my father, job-related things. There was no there's no epic in my family history. My dad just got a job in the Netherlands. He was sort of a trainee, and he had and then we moved back and forth. He also, that's why they lived in Lima. That's why they moved around, just work. There was no, I mean, I would love to say that he was, I don't know, leftist or something, but it's kind of boring. It's just work.
Yeah.
And it's not even.
You just came with him, yeah.
Yeah, I just got dragged along and hated every minute of it. I really disliked. The net effect of all the moving around is not feeling at home anywhere, really. Not really, except for this house in the woods that I've spoken to you about. That is the first place I came.
Right now we're inside your house in Santiago.
Yeah, we had to come down from the mountain after the schools started up again.
And so 4 hours away, to the south or the north?
It's a little closer. It's like 3 hours from the capital. It's really close by.
And you have this little house that appears in the Night Gardener section.
Yeah. The joke about that text is that my wife used to call me the Night Gardener because I get obsessed at certain times. Actually, right now I'm leaving tomorrow, and there's no space in the car because it's filled with plants. And
we're at the beginning of springtime. Springtime is about to happen.
We have spring now. And so she would joke about and say, you're like a mad night gardener. And that's how that text came about.
Right. Well, let's posit that from that chapter with Schwarzschild, you have another chapter which is about these two remarkable, especially Griesedieck. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Griesedieck.
And the Japanese mathematician whose name again is
Mochizuki.
And so you have a chapter about them. They also are cases of, at least in this telling, and certainly one of the things that's, by the way, fascinating about this is one keeps on as a reader saying, no, this couldn't possibly have happened. You go online and it's all. Most of the stuff did happen, versions of it.
Something very, very important to me. I in all that I write, I'm always I'm using fiction to get people interested in things that are really unbelievable, but that are true. So I want people to get that adrenaline hit of this is not true, this is bullshit, this cannot be true. And I know, I know where to place them, where they're gonna. And I think that's what a good writer does, really. You make the unbelievable sort of accessible. You point towards the mystery, but I want the actual mystery to be true. I would hate it when they said, "Oh, the part that I like the most is what you made up," because I'm lazy. I'm not that imaginative.
It's again that click. Because I suspect many people are like me. You're reading and you say, whoa, this can't be happening. You go, you look it up, and indeed, and by the way, it's so much different today with Wikipedia and so forth. You could just look it up very quickly, and it's true. And it's just the satisfying click that happens when that you're going, oh my God. But in any case, so there too you have this kind of looking into the abyss of mathematics in this case, and the vertigo that creates, and the kind of swallowing up of self, and the abnegation of self, and so forth. So you have those, in effect, you have those three pieces at the beginning. You have the Prussian blue, that remarkable, entirely non-fictional, except for that one paragraph. Is it the last paragraph, by the way, that's the one that's fictional? Or you're not going to tell? Yeah. And by the way, that is a springboard, where you feel that as you get to that last paragraph, everything else is impossible but true, and you know it's true. And then the last paragraph has the slightest change in register, and it's like a springboard that leads you to the next story. And that one, as you say, has somewhat more fictional, but it's largely straight. And then the same thing happens.
Oh, no. It's not. I think that people, they are all riddled with fiction. Schwarzschild died without ever knowing what he had discovered. What I do is that I take materials that are documentary, his letters, his texts, his papers, and you weave them in a way where you sort of say, and it's funny to me to see these reactions. People are like, oh well, yeah, that second test, and I'm like, no, that's my complete fictionalization of this life, and these are not well known figures at all. Schwarzschild has been
Schwarzschild's really not well. Yeah.
completely forgotten. I mean, I heard about him in passing from this talk about quantum gravity, and Brian Greene says, oh, there's this lieutenant fighting in the war and he solved, and I said, wait a second, that's where this text comes from. But then the text that you just spoke about, the mathematician, that is, again, that's a complete fiction in the sense that I bumped into a news story that said there's this wonderful proof that nobody can understand. And it's that which draws me in. Right. Nobody can understand. And that's what got me there. And I started sort of, there's not much you can find about a working mathematician. I found a couple of, and I have to dive into these very erudite blogs of mathematicians discussing things that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. And that's what keeps me interested. And while I was researching him, I found this much bigger story, which was Alexander Grothendieck, because Grothendieck is just, he's a Leviathan and a mystic, and his life, and that's the great thing about it. Now, his life, which reads like a complete work of fiction, like something Philip K. Dick might have thought up, that is documentary. What I did is combine things that are true by themselves, but are not true as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So in any case, and this is what I was going to ask generally of the book, is this a book that began with its architecture and began with its themes, or these were individual stories you had heard? And another way of putting this, by the way, is how the hell do you know all this stuff? Is it that you then do an incredible amount of research, you get lost in reading, and then I mean, I guess, what order does it come in? These are all stories that appeal to you, partly because of this theme of staring into the abyss, which, by the way, is not the first time you've been doing this in your writing.
No.
The book before this, it's called After the Light. Would that be a correct translation? Mm-hmm. Not yet will it be translated into English, by the way? Is there any chance?
I don't know, because I am. It's a very personal book.
Right.
It's written after a very personal experience. It's not like I'm all over the book. I appear in perhaps, I don't know, some 7 paragraphs throughout the entire thing.
Right.
No, I did it, but it is born of a personal experience. And now that I'm suddenly well known or known, I'm not sure. Perhaps I'll, and it's great because nobody can find it, because there was a very small print run, no? And people they read the reviews and they're like, oh, so he went through all these things and it's all very esoteric, and they want to read it and they can't. And I think that's wonderful. It's wonderful that there are things in this world that you can't get your hands on.
Aren't you adorable? But anyway, I'm going to say, as a person who's read it, and I'm not going to push it, I'm not going to push it, that there came a moment in your life where you ceased to understand the world, as it were.
Yes, absolutely.
Radically. Yeah. I would describe it perhaps as an epistemological nervous breakdown. I mean,
I hadn't heard that one, so let's go with that one.
Where suddenly you couldn't tell whether you believed something, you knew something, you couldn't, a moment of extreme radical doubt, a real Cartesian.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anything, I don't think there's anything exceptional about that. I think there's traditions in the West, in the East, in modern and in ancient thinking where they're trying to drive you towards that.
And that, in fact, is part of what that book is about.
That is what the book is about, right. Really. Yes, exactly.
But in any case, what's interesting to me, and we're not going to go into detail because you don't want to, and because anybody wants to go looking for the book. But in any case, the point is that you had this crisis, and I wonder to what extent that experience of your own, which was 10 years ago, for however long it lasted, and it was quite harrowing from the sound of it, tempered your interest in these sorts of stories.
Completely.
Yeah. So that I guess I'm asking, with this book here, do we start with you saying to yourself, I'm going to write a book about people who've stared into the abyss, or does it start out as a series of short stories that don't quite cohere at first, or was the architecture there first, and then you did research?
It comes from research. It all comes from research. It comes from, but before, well, to answer more fully, before the research part, you sort of, well, I sort of developed a certain feeling, a personal connection to the void, to abysmal matters. It kind of starts calling out to you. You have to develop a keen interest. It's almost like, imagine the reverse of believing in God, but not in the sense that you stop believing in God, but you sort of get a sudden whiff of God's backside, his shadow. And I started to gravitate towards certain stories, and I'm probably going to gravitate towards them for the rest of my life, because I don't have the stamina at 40 to go after any experience that is even similar to what I put myself through. And because it was very irresponsible, and it altered the direction of my life, and my life is not that bad now, so I don't want to alter it. But it was so then you start getting this sense, and this is kind of shameful to admit, because I find that literary people are very averse. They have no patience for these things. It reeks of spiritual, esoterical bullshit. So science is suddenly a way. I found that science is a way of pointing to these mysteries, and with sort of, it has more pedigree. You can speak about what is most important to me, which is not truth, but rather mystery.
Did you have a deep scientific education, or is all stuff since your education that you've been diving into?
No, I trained as a journalist, and but I do have obsessions. And since I was a kid, I was at the top of every class. I would read the book the first day of school. Like I would read the entire book, and then they would kick me out because I'd make it impossible for them to teach. So I've had this sort of obsession with fundamentals that you can, and then I just bump into these stories and I say, oh, this is a way I can approach that. But my first drafts, they're all nonfiction. I try to stick as close as I can to the truth, to the historical truth. And because that's what interests me. But then I show it, and again, the people who are close to me are like, well, you're a writer, so you should really consider writing. And I'm like, no, I don't want to write. This is enough. And they're like, no, it's not enough. And they're right. Fiction sees a deeper, or at least a stranger truth. The demon eye of fiction sees weirder.
I think that's precisely right, and that the part of what's remarkable about the book is that you're dealing with scientists, but you deal with it in such rich, often metaphorical language and so forth, which is not the kind of way that they would. Although some scientists, Einstein famously thought in metaphors, and that's how he thought. But Heisenberg in particular, is basically, I was going to say that you have those first three chapters, and then you have this middle novella, which is the story of Schwarzschild, the story of Heisenberg versus Schrodinger and a few other characters. But is light a particle? Is it a wave? Is the basic thing, but the implications on both sides are just catastrophic because it's just so it's not logical, and so with Heisenberg you get a sense of a person who is very consciously trying to get rid of metaphors. He doesn't like the idea of an atom being the sun, and the electrons going.
Yeah, he's trying to find
all that.
Yeah, he's trying to find an inroad. He's trying to find an inroad to the world that doesn't use the already trodden paths of logic and mathematical reasoning. And what he did was so extreme that I believe, at least my personal opinion is that it took this stubborn man's unwillingness to accept anything but what reality was saying about itself, as strange as that was, for us to begin to discover a completely new realm. And I think we all benefit from that. I mean, we do think with other people's words. I think William Burroughs kept saying that. We think with other people's words. We think with their thoughts.
Right.
So we're kind of stuck in this image. And Heisenberg just throws it all away. He says, okay, I'm not going to use any of this. I'm not going to use trajectories or speed or momentum. I'm just going to use numbers. And what is born of that?
Matrices of numbers.
And I have this personal belief, because I practice magic, that mathematics is the closest in science to what we used to regard as magical thinking. It's a strange thing.
There's I'll just read a passage in your Heisenberg section. The physicist, like the poet, should not describe the facts of the world, but rather generate metaphors and mental connections. From that summer onwards, Heisenberg understood that to apply concepts of classical physics, such as position, velocity, momentum, to a subatomic particle was sheer madness. The aspect of nature required a completely new language. But what's fascinating to me, the new language is going to be a language purely of number, but your description of what it was like for him to get to that is so fraught and so laden with extraordinary metaphors and extraordinary. I mean, I guess you'd say it's a poet's version of what that was like, and yet at the end of the day,
and yet we lose. I think that's the essential thing. No, I've come to think that deep truth is something that you behold. It's something that you look at. And as soon as you open your mouth, as soon as you try to put it into thoughts, into words, it gets bent and crooked, and it loses something essential in the way. And I almost everything I write is sort of I'm hitting my head against the wall. No, and that's what my other book that you talked about, After the Light. After that experience, there was no writing to be done. I stopped reading. I still haven't regained the passion or the pleasure of reading as I used to. I can hardly finish a book. It's very hard, and you get other things in return, but you do lose something essential, because you stop believing in the truth that words can convey. And if you don't have that, what do you have?
Direct. It's funny, as you know, we've talked about this. Maybe this is part of what prepared me so much for this book, but my first book was literally called "Seeing is Forgetting the Name of the Thing One Sees." Mm-hmm. That if you're going to see, you just got to get language out of there in some way. But just saying, let's all be quiet, and isn't the right. You have to work your way through the language to get there. And one of the things I keep feeling in this book is the torrents of language and gorgeous language that finally bring you to a kind of earned silence. Wittgenstein, that we cannot know that we should not speak. One way of doing that is just say, well, I'm not going to speak. But it took him 90 pages to get to that moment where you could say that, and I think a similar
but then again, literature has this great advantage over science in the sense that we get to play with every single aspect of the human imagination. We're not limited to what's real. We're not limited to perhaps we're limited to what's true, but in a deeper sense. And that's the thing. No, I mean, I believe that literature has this wonderful, it's not tied down to any set idea of the truth, to one vision of the world. So we do play these games, and then sometimes we actually get to inhabit these dreams and visions that people come up with. So what I'm trying to do is choose certain topics and subjects, for example, the singularity, where you are inevitably, you end up talking about paradoxes, contradictions, and language sort of is shown naked in a sense. And I think that capacity of literature to just show the knots in our thinking is what keeps me going back to it.
There's, by the way, a great Russian lepidopterist, a butterfly scientist, who says that the true master combines or melds the precision of the poet and the imagination of the scientist. which is a funny thing to say.
No,
Even if you're Nabokov. But the precision of the poet and the imagination of the scientist, and I kept on having that trill through my head as I was reading you, because no matter how far-flung or wild the prose was getting at, evoking these abysmal moments, these vertiginous moments, it was very precise. And what you were talking about was very, very imaginative scientists. I mean, by the way, I meant to ask you, have scientists talked to you about the book? Have you been getting responses? Yeah, and what kind of responses are you getting?
Well, they're all different. Mathematicians tend to be, the overwhelming response has been that of enthusiasm. People, but the ones that I like the best are these mad men and mad women who write me and they send me their papers, and you have to read this tetric structure springing from a point and how the universe is built. I really like this thing that I think that literature is wonderful in the sense that you deal in delirium. It's not truth and falsehood. It's not madness, because pure madness is just a disease, no?
Right.
But there is so much to see in delirium. And these are delirious aspects of our imagination. They're delirious aspects of the world. So you have to use the most precise prose that you can, because it shows through so much better that way.
By the way, we were talking at the beginning about God, and delirium and religion share the same root of being bound and losing your bindings and so forth. It's interesting, by the way, some of the reviews I've read in the United States, in the United States in particular, we have these fiction, nonfiction panics that happen all the time in America. And I don't want to go into great detail, but one of the, it's not even a criticism, but a concern is, well, we got a problem here because we can't tell what's true and what's not true in this book. And one of the things I thought about was that the book enacts what we cease to understand the world. It's hard to tell what is true and not true. And that is what it's like to live, to really be in the middle of narrative. And that's part of so in a way, it's a criticism. It's not as if you are not that you are unaware that you are playing this game, and the game is part of the point. It seems to me.
Of course, it's part of the ideas that I'm dissecting in the book. But I also think that you sacrifice truth. If you sacrifice truth, you do it for something greater. No, something that's much more important, and you sacrifice it for meaning, because facts don't come with their meaning. And meaning is something that only narrative and fiction can give. So the sense of bewilderment or anger, even anger that some people feel while reading it, has a lot to do with the point that I'm trying. I don't know if I succeed or not, but I am trying to point to the stranger, larger meanings that all these stories have, and that you simply cannot express them just with facts. And because most of the facts are the most interesting ones, the questions about how the human mind can discover these unimaginable things that even the mind itself is not built to understand, is something that you really require fiction. And I think fiction is also, if you have to choose between the two in these debates, which I find completely uninteresting, it's a human tool. It's something that, it's the sharpest knife that we have to sort of carve into and navigate these deranged inner landscapes, no? That only we as human beings ever get to see. So I don't think you can do justice to certain types of stories without the rich mechanisms of fictions. So especially because I'm writing about highly abstract ideas that you would require a degree in advanced mathematics or physics to completely come to grips with. And yet, by using fiction, you get this aesthetic feeling for them. You know?
Mm-hmm. And I would go so far as to say that there are intensities of involvement, is a strong word than that, of passion in this text that are worthy of what happened to the people that you're writing about, that you won't find, that somebody who is using, quote, fact and only biographical, what you can document and so forth, just because you are getting at things that that approach doesn't get at. And it's extremely valuable and very, very, very thrilling. Just to finish our kind of some overview of the book, it basically is the middle part, or the novella is Heisenberg versus Schrodinger. It's Einstein saying, in great frustration, we can't play dice with God is not playing dice with the world. And this is the first time I've really understood the passion with which he is feeling that. And I've read that in other accounts, but you really get a sense of why that may be the case. And then on the far side, you have this last piece, which is now completely fictional, the Night Gardener. It's a ride. It's a real ride. 225 pages, and it's just extraordinary. And by the way, one thing I realized just now this afternoon when I was rereading it, the climax, of course, is at the 5th Solvay Conference on October 24th, 1927, when it's the real gladiatorial confrontation between Heisenberg and Schrodinger. And it's interesting to realize that that is the same month when talkies first happened. October 6th, 1927 is the jazz singer is.
Well, one of the things that I think is I think we're feeling echoes of a similar time right now, even if we're not aware, and we can't be aware by definition, right. No, but I think people feel it very deep down, and I don't see it as something, it's not something I intended. I think that if you open yourself up to certain influences, you can get infected. You can get, and that spills out. It spills out into books, into arts, and then people just sort of, they have a sense of recognition that we are right now, at this exact moment, going through something similar, a massive shaking of the foundations of how we see each other, how we understand the world, what's happening in politics. It's all exploding around us, and what the book does is sort of say, well, it's like that from a talk from Philip K. Dick, where he says, if you don't like this world, you should see some of the others. No, I think we're heading that way.
We may yet.
I love it.
I can see that our friend Noah is back with us. And,
I'm back.
He's the voice of Questions Future.
Yes. First of all, thank you both so much for this conversation. This has been such a pleasure for, I think I speak for everyone at home, but for me particularly. We do have a number of audience questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. One, I think to speak to this last point that you were making, I'm going to combine a couple questions. An anonymous attendee asks, do you see it as politically allegorical, your book, in addition to a story of creative struggle bordering madness? So is there political allegory at play? And then another question from another anonymous attendee, but who is apparently a colleague at another bookstore in New York, asks, do you fear a reactionary response to your book, that our knowledge of the universe is threatening, if not dangerous, because we can't help but use it in destructive ways?
No, I don't see it as a political allegory in almost any sense. It's trying to chart a different path. Do I fear? I don't really understand the second one. I don't know if you can chip in, Ren. Do you understand what I mean?
I think he's asking to some extent whether part of the book is we've got that science is out of control. We've got that what we learn is that in fact it's just way too dangerous, and there's a whole thing politically here. Trust the science. But
Yeah, I understand, but I've got to be honest. I don't care. It just doesn't come into my thinking. I write these things without those things in mind, and whatever happens to the book, whatever happens to the people reading it, it's really on them. I'm not a political thinker. I think that works of art in general get caught up in the quagmire of our struggles, no, and they're very valid. But I'm not trying to send a particular message. I'm trying to send a message that is as strange and hopefully thought provoking. And I'm sort of trying to get people to realize that if I'm trying to do anything with a book, because it's something that I believe in, is that we need to have much more complex, even contradictory viewpoints on the world. These simple arguments of black and white, they're just not useful. We need to have multiple overlapping views on the world. Some need to be rational. Yes, of course, you have to listen to science, but you have to know science, because what science shows us is really a world that is beyond you, beyond your understanding. And that's the richness of science. And I do also think that both art and science, people don't realize that they have this terrible freedom, and which is absolutely necessary. If they did not have this almost complete, amoral, borderline disgusting freedom to do anything, to think anything, we wouldn't be here. We would not have survived. We would have died a very long time ago. So I try to shine a light on both things. I usually structure my texts where I say, look, this is horrible, and look how beautiful this is. And we are never gonna fix that. We're never going to I mean, people do, actually, people all the time, they just choose a side. No, there are people who gravitate towards the light, or I really try to look at them both.
Beauty is just the beginning of a terror we can only just barely endure, and we admire it so because it calmly disdains to destroy us. Rilke. Every angel is terrible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of angels and other esoterica, we have some questions about your relationship with magic and esotericism. So Thomas Lane asks, can you talk about your resonance with Western esotericism, or maybe just esotericism more broadly? And Karen Smythe wants to know what you mean when you say that you practice magic, and does this connect in any way with your writing practice?
Yes, of course. It's much more rational than people imagine. If you work in anything creative, you get a sense that you have a sort of, I would say, the back of your head. How do you get in touch with the back of your head? How do you establish a dialogue? No. How come there's these men and women who are just singing like angels? No. And I'm very, very jealous of that, because I've never felt very imaginative at all. So when I was going through this period of trying things out, I realized that, well, if there is that there are actually ways that we have developed to get in touch with the back of our head. But it is a step down into irrationality. It is a sort of willful opening up to forces that can actually, and I would like to preface this by saying that these things are dangerous and should be done with great care and with great learning and humility, and you have to take them seriously, because you can't fuck with your mind and expect that things will remain the same. So there's a great occult tradition, and I try to have, but it comes with this wonderful sort of warning sign before it, where it says, if you hands down believe that the things that you will experience are real, you will be destroyed. And if you hands down believe that they're fake, you will also be destroyed. And that's the sort of mindset that I think that everybody could benefit from getting. We're completely disconnected from these things.
I'll tell you a funny story that happened to a dear friend of mine many years ago. That he had a similar crisis to yours at a similar moment. He had been writing a PhD dissertation on Kabbalah, and he was 29 years old. And he came to my door one day, a few days shy of his 30th birthday, and he said, "You're not going to believe this. God appeared in my dream last night saying, you are not to have done this stuff before you turn 30. It's against the rules to study this stuff before you turn 30. And he said, you will not sleep. And 2 days later, he came to my door, you know, bags under his eyes. He says, I haven't slept. And 3 days he hadn't slept. And then I brought him into my living room. I laid him down. I played Gregorian chant music. I just anything to try to get him to sleep. And I eventually had to take him to the mental ward.
Well, you see, that's the thing. No, if he had gone to a magician, he would have said, "Oh, of course. Well, what God are you talking to? Let's get in touch and ask him to give you. No, let's be a little bit more humble and ask for a visa and maybe."
Anyway, but it's striking because it was exactly it's exactly the same moment that you had it happen to you, just on the edge of 30.
Come on, let's not. I have no idea what this man's doing with his head. But I do know that I mean, as a person who is keenly interested in science, you come up against things like the placebo effect. So magic is really just using the placebo effect willingly. It's a playful attitude. It's sort of saying, okay, well, it wouldn't hurt to ask for a little inspiration. It wouldn't hurt to suspend your disbelief in this particular setting, no? And the truth is that I came to it just out of need. If you come to these things from interest and from morbid curiosity or from a sense of power, if you come to them from need, if you are confused as you can be, if your hair's on fire, that's when you have to learn to meditate. And that's really the only time it works, because if you meditate and your hair is not on fire, you're just relaxing. You're using an app to calm down. It's if you want to extinguish your thoughts, your head has to be a light.
Other questions?
Yes, we have a number of questions. We only have time for, I think, one more, unfortunately. I'd love to keep you both here all night, but that doesn't seem fair. So I think last question comes from another anonymous attendee. They sense that you believe that you understand the world and do not include yourself in the we of your title. Is it others that have ceased to understand the world? Are they correct? They want to know. Are they off base? Another says that they remind you that you remind them of Dante. So maybe you're more of you're a lost person looking for answers in these darker regions.
I think the only person who really understands the world is Ren. I think the rest of us are just, we're lost. No, I mean, come on. It's a rhetorical question. When have we ever really understood the world? What we understand is our stories, the stories we tell about the world.
And even those we don't understand.
No, but we do go through these periods, and everybody should. I think if you just look at your own life, there are moments in your life where you're pretty okay, you're pretty set, you understand how things are going, and then it explodes. It's just. Of course, I'm including myself. This book is born from a profound, I don't know what to call it. But the thing is, of course, I include myself in that. And that is something that keeps me writing. But when you start to acknowledge these gaps in your understanding, well, you do get a better sense of some things, no? But as Richard Feynman always said, no, I am okay with not understanding. It's something I enjoy. I relish that. I'm always looking for that. I really miss what I lost when my brain matured, no? Where this sense of wonder. It's so hard to get back to that. So yes, of course, I include myself in the group.
A writer is I can't remember who said this. A writer is somebody who finds the riddle on the other side of the answer.
You're killing me with quotes, Ren. I don't have any.
You're San Sebastian with all these arrows of quotes being aimed at you. I have something, Noah, before we leave.
Yes,
Independent bookstores are the spine of democracy in a wider sense. And we have, now more than ever, and this is the most political I'll get tonight, we have to be supporting them. And a good example is the good people at the Community Bookstore. And a good example of a way to support them is to buy this book. You've just had a lovely evening with Benjamin. It's free, but do go down to the bottom there, wherever it was. No, tell them where it is, but you should buy the book and do yourself a favor. You'll really enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Ren, for making my job that much easier. Yes, I posted a link to buy When We Cease to Understand the World in the chat on your screen. You can always just visit our website, communitybookstore.net. Visit us in person. We're open for browsing. Call us. We'll make sure to get you a copy of the book. Benjamin, Ren, thank you both so much for this really fascinating conversation. Those of you at home, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you at another virtual event very soon. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you
very much, Noah. Thank you, Ren.
Abrazos.
Ciao.
Ciao.